until about a week ago, every morning I would wake up to the sound of doom. The sound that had traumatized me for every morning, every morning. It was the sound of my alarm clock. And then what I would do was that I would lean over to my bed, I would pick up the mobile and hit the snooze button. And then after 10 minutes, the alarm would ring again. And then again, I would hit the snooze button. And in this way, while hitting the snooze button, almost 30 or 40 minutes of my productive time would be wasted. And the sleep that I would get in those 30 or 40 minutes would not be that good quality of sleep. It would be really a bad kind of sleep that I would get in those 30 or 40 minutes. It was a bad habit that I had. And then I did some research on how can we effectively change our habits and instill good habits in ourselves. And that is what I'm going to share with you today. But first of all, what is a habit? Habit is a regular tendency to perform certain actions. For example, every morning when you wake up, many of us have a habit of checking our mobile phone. So it's an almost semi-autonomous action that you do. You don't really think about leaning over your bed and using your smartphone. It's almost automatic. And the more you commit a habitual action, the more automatic it becomes. So to know how we can change a habit, first we must know how a habit is formed. So there are three parts of habit formation: the trigger, the response, and the reward. The first is the trigger. So for example, in the morning at 5 o'clock at a particular time, a particular sound, the sound of my alarm clock, it's a trigger that starts the course of the habitual action, is the trigger. Then I can have a response to the trigger. I can either wake up after hearing the sound of the alarm, or I could hit the snooze button. So that's the response. These are the two types of response that I can give to the trigger. And the reason why I chose a particular response to the trigger is because of the third step, the reward that I get. If I hit the snooze button, I think that maybe I'll have 10 minutes of comfortable sleep. But if I wake up, I won't have those 10 minutes of comfort. The reward that my brain gives me decides the kind of response that I will have to the particular trigger. So these are the three things that we need to know about habits, about how a habit is formed. For example, in the bad habit of smoking, the trigger might be the initial wave of sadness that smokers get, the presence of a cigarette nearby. These are the triggers. And now you can have a response. Either you can not smoke the cigarette, or you can smoke the cigarette. If you smoke the cigarette, then you will get a reward. Dopamine will be released in your brain due to the nicotine. But if you won't smoke the cigarette, if your response is not smoking the cigarette, you won't get the reward. So if you do get the reward, you might have a particular response. If you don't have the reward, then you might not perform that response to that particular trigger. So now to change our habits, there is no one golden rule to change a habit. For everybody is different. But the research that I had done about a week ago, I will be sharing with you three common ways. First is avoiding the trigger. The logic is simple. Like if you won't have a trigger, if you won't have something to start the chain of action of those habits, then most probably you won't go and commit those habitual actions. For example, if you have a habit of overspending on food, then if you won't go to a restaurant, if you won't, let's say, be hungry for a few hours, then you might not overspend on that food. It's a technique that works only for some kind of habit and is not that effective. But in some cases, it can be effective for habits such as for trivial habits such as overspending on food. The second method, it is the method that has been used by Alcoholics Anonymous. It's the largest organization in the world that works in relation with rehabilitation of alcoholics. It's the method that the author of the book, The Power of Habits, Charles Duhigg, has suggested in his book. It's all about having a different response to the same trigger. Now, I'll give you a situation which is experienced by most of us since we are students. So every time when you are studying, there might be a time. For me, it was 7 o'clock. At that particular time, you automatically get bored of studying. You want to do something else. And then you have a habit at that exact moment of time. What I had was at 7 o'clock when I would get bored, at around 7 o'clock when I would get bored, what I would do was I would go to the kitchen and snack on something, whatever I would find in the kitchen. Cornflakes, biscuits, anything, like even the leftovers as well, I would eat. I had that bad habit. And then what I did was I created an alternative response to that same habit. I started playing guitar. And that was an alternative response to the same trigger. And that way, whenever I would get bored, I would go and play the guitar. So in this way, my body, which was trying to break the monotony of studying, could finally have a break. So this is the method. You find an alternative response. It is very hard because sometimes responses don't work. For example, the first time I did not actually play guitar, I would go and have a walk. That really didn't work for me. So you need to find alternative responses. But once you get an alternative response, then it is very easy to break that habit. The third thing is thinking about reward in a different way. So for example, in the initial situation that I told you about me pressing the snooze button, the decision that I was thinking that I was making was that if I press the snooze button, I might get 30 or 40 minutes of comfortable sleep. So what I did was I searched about it and found out that it is not true. What actually happens is that in this trigger response reward mechanism, the largest amount of dopamine, which is the feel good hormone, that is in most times the reward, only gets released as the initial phase. For example, when you're eating a high calorie meal, the moment when you feel the most amount of fun or happiness, the moment when your brain releases the highest amount of dopamine is when you take the first bite. Then it gets a lot less. So by thinking in the reward mechanism in a different way, I was able to get out of this habit of pressing the snooze button. So turns out the decision that I was making was between waking up and having 30 or 40 minutes of productive time and pressing the snooze button and actually having, let's say, 10 or 20 seconds of comfort. That's actually what happens. When you press the snooze button, you'll only have 10 or 20 seconds of comfortable sleep, not 30 or 40 minutes. And by thinking this reward in a different way, I was able to get out of my habit of pressing the snooze button a lot. So 3 things: avoid the triggers, alternative response, or think of the reward mechanism in a different way. These things can help you solve your bad habits. Thank you.